Good evening, everybody, and welcome to CASA SEAT. I am Gabriele Palma, Director of CASA SEAT, and it's really a pleasure to count on you on a digital connection. We opened our door of CASA SEAT 1 month ago to the public, but in the last few days, we received new guidelines from the authorities in order to fight against the coronavirus, and therefore, today we cannot host you directly in our auditorium. Nevertheless, we decided to go ahead. Casa Seat is where the city moves, so we will want to stop, and we will take profit about the digital connection in order to talk about a theme which is affecting actually regarding actually the coronavirus and how the spread of the coronavirus at the international level can impact also what will be the next steps on the protection of the environment. Today, we will count on the presence of Cristina Manzano, that will be connected from Madrid, and from Dr. Mamphela Ramphele, who is connected from Cape Town. Welcome to Cristina and welcome to Mamphela. Cristina is a renewed journalist. She is working with several daily newspaper. Today she is the director of esglobal.org, who is the most important publication on global affairs in Spanish language. And she is also a very known expert regarding what are the issues related to international teams and globalization. And Mamphela is a doctor, is academic, is a businesswoman, and is a political thinker. But she's also the co-president of the Club de Roma, which is very active also on teams regarding globalization and impact on next activities. So Mamphela received several international awards, acknowledging the leading role in projects that for marginalized people in South Africa and also in other countries. Therefore, it's really, really a pleasure to welcome Cristina from Madrid and Mamphela from Cape Town. Thank you very much for being with us. And Cristina, I will leave you the word in order to moderate a conversation with Mamphela. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here. I would have loved to be there in Barcelona. I'm really sorry that this could not be done this time. I send all my support to the people of Barcelona and to the whole of Catalonia. I really hope this situation goes away soon and that we are able to cope with the virus as we have been able to cope with it so far. So next time in Barcelona, for sure. It's also an honor to share this conversation with Mamphela because I'm also a member of the Club of Rome, and I really admire the work of the club and her role and her work throughout all her life. So I hope to have a nice and interesting conversation about this issue that it's really important for us, but it's really important for the whole of the planet. How are we dealing with sustainability issues? How are we dealing with the environment, especially now? And what are we? How are we seeing this fight against climate change, against destroying the planet as we've been doing after the COVID time? And let me try and share with you some, I don't think I can share my screen, but anyway, let me start with a very simple anecdote. The first time I went out, I left home after several weeks being under lockdown. The thing that most struck me was these weeds coming out of the cracks on the asphalt, on the street in Madrid. It was striking because nature was already taking over what we had destroyed in our streets. It was a mirage, it was an illusion, because as soon as we started to go out, as soon as the lockdown started to fade away, we recovered all the traffic, we recovered all these jams taking over our cities and our highways. But for a while, we had the illusion that we could cope with climate change in a different manner. In fact, we were starting to receive the first data coming from China. In China, during the first months of the year, remember, all of us remember that the lockdown started there, the pandemic started there. As I was saying, that during the first months of the year, carbon emissions went down up to 25%. In general, all the forecasts think that we might lose 4% of emission throughout the whole 2020. But again, that is, in itself, it could be a very good news. We are reducing the number of emissions, the volume of emissions. It is also only in theory, because in fact, that is due to the sudden stop of all of our economic activity, which is not such a good news. On the other hand, as soon as the economic activity started to recover, even if slowly, we also saw the recovery of the emissions. Also, it's not such a good news because in order to achieve the goals set by the Paris Agreement, in order to achieve those 1.5% only I'm saying quoting, in increase for the next 20 years, we should be reducing emissions at a rate of 6% per year, and we are far from that. So are we expecting a change after the COVID in our habits, in our policies? It's still to be seen. In China, for instance, as I was mentioning, we saw the reduction on the one hand, but we are also seeing signs that they are planning new coal plants in order to recover the activity. They need to grow, and for them to grow has a very strong impact on energy and on the way they produce that energy. We've already seen in the United States, in the Trump administration, that they wanted to cut still more funds and more activities dealing against climate change. On the other hand, in the Democrats' programs for the elections, many members already, and the candidate and many congressmen and women have plans like new Green Deals in their programs. So we might see a change there if there is a change in the American administration. But I'd like to go very quickly throughout what I believe it might be the most important plan in dealing with the environment in the coming future, and that comes from the European Union. And the plan was already there, but the coronavirus crisis has only put more pressure on this plan. And as we've seen this morning, this dawn, the European Union has decided to take a very important step forward in dealing with the future. As you know, the recovery fund, the recovery plan has been approved, and there is and also the financial, the budget for the next 7 years has been approved, and in there is a big amount of money for what is being called the Green Deal. The Green Deal tackles areas like the energy, pollution, food. There is a strategy called from farm to fork, dealing with the way we feed ourselves, with mobility, with every area dealing with the environment, and it has become one of the pillars of the future of the European Union. So among all these bad news, I think we have to congratulate ourselves because the European Union is decided to lead that fight against climate change and for the sustainability of our planet. I'm going to stop here and I'm going to give the floor to Mamphela. Because as I said, the Club of Rome is one of the most important institutions dealing with these issues for a long, long time. In fact, maybe many of you may not know that the first report published on the subject came out of the Club of Rome. It was called The Limits to Growth, and it was published in the early 70s. In the early 70s, where the word sustainability was not even in our dictionaries. So Mamphela, please, and let me also stress the fact the very good fact that for the last years, in the renewal of the presidency of the Club of Rome, there are 2 co-chairs, 2 women. It's the first time in the history of the club that 2 women lead the club. So I'm really happy to be here with you, and I'm really glad to be able to listen to you and to learn more about how the club is facing all these challenges. Mamphela, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Cristina. It is wonderful to be here. And I want to add to your good news, which starts with the fact that we have had an existential crisis in the form of this coronavirus. And we have seen an amazing capacity within us across the globe to change our behaviors. So yes, it could have been an illusion that we dropped the rate of emissions, etc., etc. But we now know is possible. Before that, people used to say, you can't. Now we know we can. And what you have also described in terms of the Green Deal of the EU is an encouraging indicator that if people come together and focus on a transformative process that take us closer to the fundamentals of a well-being economic approach, which promotes the well-being of people and of the planet. We really have to celebrate that, because in a way, the virus has reminded us that economic growth may be a wonderful thing in people's minds, but the limits to growth already 50 years ago warned that if we focus on growth, we are actually losing the deal. We are losing the plot. And the virus has brought us back to focusing on well-being of people and of the planet. And so as the Club of Rome, we take pride in the fact that most of our members, wherever they are contributing to their countries and their regions to think differently about how we address the multiple crises that we face. Because we don't just have a coronavirus crisis or a planet change crisis. No, we've got a multiple layers of emergencies. There is the planetary emergency, which was there before Corona. There is the socioeconomic emergency, which is due to the incredible inequalities in our world and the poverty alongside obscene overconsumption. And then, of course, the coronavirus found an ecosystem that we promoted. I come from a country which has the dubious fame of being one of the most unequal in the world. And we can see it now. Our response to the coronavirus pandemic has been hampered by the fact that the majority of South Africans live in poverty, in overcrowded environment with very little infrastructure. So it is against that background that the Club of Rome, in its renewing of itself, starting 2 years ago, looked at how do we move from lamenting the fact that the alarm we sounded those 50 years ago about the importance of understanding that there is a limit to growth, because you do not have limitless natural and other resources. We thought it is much better to go beyond sounding the alarm, but to identify what can be done. And so we identified 5 themes. The first is, yes, we have a planetary emergency because of climate change, but we don't stop there. We have produced a planetary emergency action plan that people can adopt and deal with in the different contexts, because there is no one size fits all. But basically, it turns around the need for us to make this transition from carbon-based energy to renewables, make the transition from a focus on economic growth and its impact on utilizing more than we need from the ecosystem. And so the Planetary Emergency Action Plan is very clear that we've got multiple tipping points, and therefore our approach has to be a holistic one. The second theme is about reforming economics. People will tell you, is the economy stupid? No, it is well-being stupid. And if you didn't believe it, you now have to believe it. Because even the mighty America, it cannot move because people are unwell. And so economics is meant to be about the exchange of goods and services for the promotion of well-being for people and the planet. But we made it into a holy cow that if you need to starve people of essential services in order to promote economic growth, you do that. This is what we say can be done. And fortunately, within the Club of Rome, we've got economists who are looking at how do we move away from GDP as a measure of development to well-being of people and the planet and appropriate indicators of that. The third theme is about rethinking finance. If you open your TV or radio everywhere, it's about what does the market say. So we have made the market into some kind of god. So if your currency goes up or down, you are worried about it. We've forgotten that finance is meant to be a tool for the exchange of goods and services. But we have made it into the tail that wags the dog. So we are saying we've got to change the way we think about finance, and we've got to finance things very differently with this lens of well-being. The fourth area is about rethinking the way we imagine human civilization. So we are saying that we are in these emergencies because the current way in which human civilization operates is unsustainable. So we need to find a way of emerging out of our multiple emergencies with a new human civilization. It will be a civilization that recognizes that we are one human race on one planet, on Mother Earth, which has many lessons to teach us. Nature teaches us lessons that we just ignore. And if we just go back to that, to where our ancient ancestors actually drew the strength to be able to evolve on my continent, the continent of Africa, because they recognized the laws of nature and went with the waves of nature, the rhythm of nature rather than against it. And finally, we have the intergenerational conversational theme, because we can't, I'm 72 today, I can't lead the charge into the 22nd century. What I can do, and I regard myself as a bridge between my generation that fought for freedom and the next generations that must shape the future that they can very proudly bequeath to their children. So those are the 5 themes of the Club of Rome. And in those themes, we are drawing on the expertise of all of our members. We have never had so much activity as we now have. Now we talk about the European Green Deal. The Club of Rome was heavily involved in helping to surface the issues that should be part of that conversation. We have people in places like Australia and other places who are taking bits and pieces of, in fact, they contributed to the planetary emergency plan and are implementing it in where they are. And here I am in Africa. Obviously, we have the advantage of having still a huge potential to shape a development approach which does not necessarily mimic Europe or America, but that is much more in tune with nature.
I will ask you about Africa now, because it's a fascinating continent, and we here in Spain at least know so little about it. But before that, let me just make a couple of comments. What you just described, the programs of the Club of Rome, is amazing, because they were there before this COVID crisis, but they fit so well into what we are seeing and thinking today. And it seems that suddenly many people realize about this very intrinsic connections of nature and what is happening today, and how the loss of biodiversity has definitely had an impact on the speed and the strength of this virus, for instance. And it was there, it was already there. Something that many of us have experienced during this lockdown is that we have also rediscovered nature in our cities. And suddenly we have rediscovered clean air, and we have rediscovered that birds sing in the morning and throughout the day. And I really see a reconnecting of many people with nature, and a reconnecting of people with other ways of being on earth and dealing with cities. And let me just add, to me it was also very interesting, things like the result of the municipal elections in France, where the Greens won large numbers of cities, of small cities, of villages, and where the Paris municipality was won on a green program by a socialist leader. And she has Anne Hidalgo, the current Paris mayor, had already adopted during the lockdown things like transforming one of the most important streets in Paris, Rue Rivoli, that goes all along Les Tuileries. She transformed it in a bike lane, which didn't exist before. So there is this appetite on the part of the citizens about that, on changing things, of doing things in another manner. And as citizens in democratic countries, we prove that through our vote, and that is a very good perspective. Also, let me just add that I'm going to ask you about Africa now, but what you described of those challenges dealing with increasing poverty, with bad policies and all that, we are seeing that in Latin America, a region that is really loved by us because it touches so much on Spain. And I really hope, and they are having trouble facing many of these challenges in countries so important as Brazil and Mexico, for instance, not only because of the impact of the virus, but also because of the policies they are following. But let's go to Africa. Africa is as I said, is a fascinating continent. It's just 15 kilometers across our continent through Europe. We sometimes tend to forget that. And many times we only hear about Africa in bad terms, dealing with conflicts, with migration, with terrorism even. But there is such a whole and bright reality there, and many other advances that are being taken. So could you please share with us some of the main issues going on in Africa regarding these topics?
The first thing, and I'm very pleased that you talk, Cristina, about how close Africa is to Europe, and yet how distant it is in terms of understanding.
Right.
And part of that is the problem that is at the heart of so-called global economics or the global economic system. Let's remind ourselves that Africa as the cradle of humanity was the innovator in ways that need to be acknowledged. Because if you don't know where you come from, you cannot find your way to the future. That's fact. But the future of Africa has been nullified into the so-called dark continent. Let's remind your listeners to the fact that reading, writing, mathematics, geometry, you just look at those pyramids that were built how many hundreds of thousands of years ago, they're still standing today, which means what? That they understood geometry, they understood architecture, they understood materials engineering. And yet people continue to talk about Africa, the dark continent. And second, in terms of intellectual development, your country, Spain, had universities built by Africans who crossed the peninsula to build universities. And then we have to look at the Nile River system. You had to learn, you had to learn from nature to be able to develop the kind of rich agronomy and agro business system that was built along the Nile River. And they learned so well that they had abundance, which is why they had time to sit and reflect on the stars. They could work out the cosmology and all of those things that today people spend years and years studying. So that's important as a background. And the reason why it's important to raise today is because African people do not themselves know where they come from. And if you don't know your history, you remain a prisoner of the negative interpretations of history by other people. And so I am saying this because I'm very passionate about unleashing innovation, creativity, self-confidence in Africa so that people can design the kind of futures that they can be proud of. One of the reasons why our economies, post-colonial economies, haven't worked. Why? There is a beautiful Shona saying that if you wear somebody's clothes, you remain naked. So Africa cannot develop its full potential by adopting these so-called global macroeconomic frameworks. Who designed those? And the designers of those macro frameworks, they dump them as soon as the situation changes. But if you do that in Africa or in Asia, then you are seen to be somehow off beam. And the markets will not be very happy with you. Who are the markets? These are people who are speculators. They're actually gamblers. I mean, right now, today, there was this comment on the news that despite all of our problems, this huge surge in coronavirus and having been declared junk, our currency is strengthening. Why? Speculators. It's got nothing to do with value. So my first take is Africa will have to find its own development path. And that pathway will be all the more successful if the measure of success is the well-being of the people of Africa. And Africa's people are young, energetic, creative, and the planet and Mother Earth on this part of the continent is rich in its endowments. Now imagine if we were to rethink our economics, reframe our economics to be about well-being, starting at the local level. Now you talked about the Greens winning cities in France. This is a fascinating thing because we have, as a member of the Club of Rome, Keith Kate Raworth, who's developed this donut economics. Can you imagine? And she's experimenting with it in Amsterdam. Can you imagine if every city in Europe were to adopt a donut economic model? You completely shift the patterns of consumption. We are over-consuming and we waste a lot. We don't recycle enough. And we will then get less dependent on carbon generated energy, because we will then be able to use the natural endowments. Now, Africa has been blessed with sunshine 365 days of the year. Please, why can't we have solar power coming out of our ears? And now battery technology has solved the problem of baseload. We have wind here this is the Cape of Storms, as you know, having been in South Africa. So we've got all of nature working in our favor, but we don't grasp it. We want to replicate the coal-generated energy that Europe generated because they don't have enough sun. And so I am very encouraged that the African Union has created what they call the African Union Development Agency, which is implementing the new partnership for Africa's development. And they have looked at what do they do together as a region to deal with emergencies. And that is a wonderful opportunity to fast track the single market that they were talking about, because you can't produce generators, enough pharmaceutical goods, etc., if you're not taking advantage of the 1.3 billion market. If you're doing it for South Africa with its 50-something million people, it's not viable. So we have an amazing opportunity to develop this new economic approach and to wear our own clothes and stop being naked and measure our success by the well-being of people in the village, in the district, in the town, in the city, in each country, and of course, collectively in the region. It is possible. And the reason why it's possible is that our median age is around 20 years. So we've got a future ahead of us. The second thing is that we have also in Africa, because somehow of the hardships, a lot of innovation. You look at the M-Pesa, you look at how ICT has been harnessed as a tool for development. And of course, there is also talk within the AU setup about how to build back better after COVID. And the seed of that building better is from the emergency actions that they take today. So it's about leveraging the emergency to emerge into a space where the continent is more resilient, the continent's people are well, and the continent itself regrows its devastated biodiversity, which the reason we have coronavirus is because we have destroyed our forests. These viruses lived very happily in the forest and we didn't have to get into touch with them. But when you cross those taboo barriers that our ancient elders told us, you don't eat this or that or the other thing. We eat it or we grab it so that we can sell it to China or to Korea or wherever we sell it, then we are paying the price. So we have to go back to the wisdom of the ancients.
You've mentioned so many interesting things, but you referred to the sun and to the amount of sun that Africa receives. Paradoxically, the countries which have more capacity installed of solar energy regarding in relation to their national gross product and their consumption of energy in Europe are Sweden and Finland. So it's not only about sun, it's about policies and about willingness by policymakers and citizens to push that. You've also mentioned M-Pesa, and it's probable that many of our listeners and viewers don't know what M-Pesa is, but it's one of the most innovative companies in Africa, which has developed a system of payments by the mobile phone, which is unique in the world, and has made payments by phone the most advanced thing in the world in Africa, and many people outside Africa don't know that. And you've also mentioned a very important point, which is transforming the way we measure growth and we measure our economy, and putting well-being at the front of our thinking. Some countries are already experiencing that and are trying to introduce that. And the most advanced, in my opinion at least, is New Zealand. It's the most committed to that. I wanted to ask you whether there is any example in Africa that could make us think that they are in the good path in that country, or if not, what do you think about the future in this regard? And then I would also like you to comment on the other point you mentioned, which is youth, which is the average, the median average of young people in the continent, and you mentioned it at the beginning, the gap between, well, the intergenerational challenge that we have there. What is the Club of Rome doing about this, mixing older people and young people to create a better society?
You know, it's interesting that the countries that have adopted the well-being economics are mostly led by women.
Right.
New Zealand, Scotland,
Iceland.
So there is something about the willingness to think outside of the box of the old style economics that has made it possible for those women leaders to stand up and be counted. Now, on the continent, we have a country which suffered the most horrendous genocide at the time when we became free. That is Rwanda. You go to Rwanda today. What I'm talking about, this focus on well-being and on development bottom-up, you find it. When I was still a managing director at the World Bank, Rwanda was one of the first countries I visited. It was in the early 2000s. So they still had, those horrific sites where you just see the devastation that happened. But at the same time, they had a school of excellence for math and science for women. Because what Kagame did, which no other African leader did, was to recognize that the struggle for freedom in Rwanda will never have happened without the support of women. And that the peace they achieved was because women were able to cross the boundaries and reach out to the humanity of people across the boundary. And so I would put Rwanda as one of the examples of success in Africa. I would also express my confidence in Ghana and how it is getting itself geared up for long-term sustainability. And then, of course, Botswana has always been a country that you would really think it's on the brink of. But I think Botswana's issues are related to its inability to shed the chains of old-fashioned economic development theory. That is the obstacle. Mm-hmm. Because if they were to shed that, then they will be able to move much more rapidly to have an inclusive well-being economy, which takes advantage of the vastness of their natural resources. That there would be no marginalization of people who happen to be the sons who were the original owners of this part of the world, because they haven't thought through it, right? So Mauritius is another country which also is doing well, but it also has not yet broken the barrier of rethinking its economics into a well-being economic setup where everybody is included, because then you've got all the talent, all the creativity from the different perspectives coming together to create a really amazing, resilient, well-being setup.
And the youth, how
The
can
youth.
we create? Yeah.
That is my absolute focus in life. You know, I was a youth activist, and I know just how important it is. As a young person, you are fearless. I'm now 72, and I spend basically more than 60% of my time supporting young people, whether they're professionals, whether they're students, whether they're whatever, because I believe that that's how we can invest in the future of those who are yet to be born. Now, how do we do that? First of all, we have to reimagine a future different from the one we have, not a straight line to the future, different. So in South Africa, for example, I founded, together with a friend of mine who's also in the 70s, a Reimagine South Africa. And Reimagine South Africa is challenging young people, whether they're lawyers or accountants or whatever, to think differently about what they could be as citizens of a country which has the most beautiful constitution, but does not live the values of that constitution. What is going to make the change? And this speaks now to the entire continent. What I talked about in terms of the history of this continent applies to each and every country. My country still suffers from the inferiority complexes amongst the majority of people, because racism is alive and well, because it is a tool to justify exploitation. So white people in this country, the majority of them, believe that they have the wealth they have because they work harder, they're smarter, etc. They forget that they actually blocked my ancestors from, in fact, dispossess them of the land and then block them from becoming what they could have become. Now, we don't want to go there, but what we want to do is to acknowledge, how did we get here that 80% of the population is poor and 1% is incredibly poor, incredibly rich, and the majority, the 20% are largely people who have found a break. But our constitution says, for us to become a country of our dreams, we need to acknowledge the legacy of the past and the damage it has done to how we see ourselves and see other people. And this is what I spoke about earlier on about. We need to recognize that there is only one human race. This language of races, it's ridiculous, because we know from science there's only one race, human race. But we continue, even the educated people, to speak of a racism, multiracialism. What is that? It's because our minds don't want to move. We need to shift our mindset to a world of one human race with one Mother Earth that has given birth to this diversity so that we can be rich, right? So the second thing about South Africa, which also applies to the rest of the continent, is that having lived in a racist, sexist society, we did not invest in shifting mindsets to a value system that values and respects human dignity and respects the self so that you can respect others. and believe in justice and equality for everybody. Those things were the opposite. This, what we are talking about, which is in our constitution, the Bill of Rights, is the exact opposite of the regimes that govern this part of the world and the continent for the last 500 years. The third part is we have not done enough, and our government does not get it. That you don't change the economic setting by sharing what already exists. You change the economic setting by shifting how you conceive of socioeconomic development. And if we were to just make that shift, this is a rich country. Imagine what could happen in the Eastern Cape, where every village is a node of development, and people have got, the young people, we talk about young people, are given guaranteed employment and skills training so they can develop the infrastructure in each and every village where they live and be able to be the artisans, the business people, the engineers, the whatever. Is possible. And also, South Africa has got vast territory for growing food in an organic way. We can feed ourselves and export the surplus. And for starters, export to the rest of the continent and be importing the things that we don't produce from the rest of the continent. Now imagine what that would do to the well-being of this continent. And the same thing applies to Latin America. Latin Americans have to go back to the wisdom of the indigenous people of Latin America, who live there happily in abundance. I mean, when you see what Mexico was before your people arrived, the Spanish arrived there and destroyed a rich civilization. They've got to go back and reclaim it in order to enrich the emerging new civilization that we talk about.
There is probably, hopefully, a movement worldwide towards that. And you were talking about racism, and we are seeing all these people in the streets, not only in the United States, but also in many places in Europe and elsewhere, just claiming to have real egalitarian societies. And as you said, this is not only about rights and laws and constitutions, it's about changing mindsets and really getting rid of things that are very ingrained in some societies. And also talking about the youth and what we can expect from them. I really think it was very, very interesting what Greta Thunberg and all her and the Fridays for Future movement have created again throughout the world. And they didn't need us. They just went out and claimed for their future, and they are there. And Africa is also seeing a huge amount of mobilizations of people going to the streets to claim for things that they are not getting, or they think they are not getting in the governments, from their governments on elsewhere. So I really think there is some hope. And I would like to think that this very bad pandemic, one is over, can help us rethink our future. Let me just finish with one question about the pandemic itself. Africa has gone through as far as we know, through the latest pandemic, or the strongest or the most dangerous pandemic with Ebola, for instance. And they were saying that there were this analysis saying that Africa was coping better with coronavirus precisely because this previous experience. What do you think? Is the continent ready? We are seeing the figures surging right now in some countries, like in South Africa, but is the continent ready to face this pandemic?
No. The continent could have been ready had they not followed the Washington Consensus Development Model. Because when we were activists, we made sure every village had a village community worker, a village clinic, district hospital, and so on. So there was a bottom-up awareness of well-being and health, and how do you keep yourself healthy and eating well and doing the right things. Second, by following the Washington Consensus, we neglected rural development. So people from the rural areas migrated to urban spaces where they are living on the peripheries of our cities. And it's not just in South Africa, it's across the continent. It's an indictment on our leaders who have failed to build on Africa's great gift for working with nature to produce enough food, to have animal husbandry, and to husband forests, and all of the, we have a continent which is still teeming with wildlife that should be part of a massive part of our economic development process. And we should be making sure that that is done in a way that sustains local communities, and that you create harmony between wildlife and human habitats in a way that is mutually reinforcing. So this is why I keep on coming back to this rethinking economics. But the other reason why we are not ready for this pandemic is because we have neglected investments in health systems. We have neglected investments in education. And where we do, like South Africa spends a huge amount of money on education, but the quality of the education is appalling, and you know. And the reason is because we are wearing the clothes of the colonials. I mean, we are naked. Whereas we've got models like the LEAPS math and science schools in some of the poorest areas. But what do? They use the Paulo Freire method of creating awareness inside every child that they have the genius right there. And that being a teacher is to be a loving presence, to enable that genius to flower. And so when you do that, the children who are brought up to be told because they're poor, they are looking scruffy, they must be stupid. They become A math and A science students, but more than that, they choose to become teachers, because the teachers in this school system, they model what it means to be a game changer, a change agent. And so that is, again, part of what we need to address. Stop wearing the old ragged clothes of colonial education and take advantage of the African education approach. Was this intergenerational conversations, storytelling by the ancients to the young ones, even if they were not educated, but they had wisdom. And so we need to rethink. So my optimism tells me that the coronavirus has held a mirror in front of ourselves and our leaders. And we can now have conversations that would have been very difficult to have before. I was dismissed as an idealist. Guess what? you have to be an idealist if you're going to maintain social distancing, wear a mask, and wash your hands. So now, what was regarded as idealistic is the new normal. So I'm very hopeful.
So we should all become idealistic as you, and follow your teachings, because it's been a very, very inspiring conversation, Mamphela. We need to finish. We are reaching our time, but also we know that you have another commitment now. But yes, it's been really interesting, really enriching. I'm so glad that we had the chance to talk about Africa. As I said, it's a continent so close and so far, and we know so little, that it's been a pleasure really to listen to you and to learn from you. And I also want to thank CASA SEAT for making it possible. I really hope to go back to normal as much as possible, not to the old normal, as Mamphela was saying. Right now. We really hope to build a new and better normal in the near future. I hope to be able to visit you in Barcelona very soon. And I hope, Mamphela, you will be also able to come to Spain and to Barcelona to visit us. And thank you all for being there, for watching us. And we hope to see you very, very soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Iniciar vídeo.